reconnects. I'm hoping that this keeps going. Our last video stopped for whatever reason. Bum, bum, bum. Had a quick difficulty. So we split this up into video part 1 and part 2. So this is part 2B, I think is what we're going to call it. Because this is technically part 2 already. But for whatever reason, we had an internet connectivity problem. So hopefully you guys can see that we are live again. I apologize that everything shut off. I'm sure I'm going to get some text messages from people saying, hey, what the heck happened? Got one person watching. Dawson came back on. Justin, is it Smitley? Thanks for coming on. I apologize for all of the issues here. One of the questions that Justin's asking is, and hopefully if you guys are watching this, this is the second part of this live stream. I had an internet problem. Go back, watch the first one. That will kind of inform you up into this one. I'll leave a link up here in the video. Justin asks, is this why it is for necromancy is forbidden because only evil spirits come from necromancy? Communicating with the dead is impossible because the dead know not.
So let me say this.
I think that's an interesting question.
Like, I'll say a point here. I do believe that that everybody will be raised up and judged before Christ, and so whatever that final judgment is, it has not happened to people yet.
So do you think that all these visions in dreams of hell, 30 seconds in hell or 3 minutes in hell, that it could be a vision of the purgatory place that we're waiting for judgment, the Abraham's bosom?
I don't like the word purgatory only because it has so much loaded terms. I don't know.
But a place of waiting.
Yeah. The Old Testament calls it Sheol. I don't know. I would say that there's a lot of possibility there. I do believe that we'll be raised up and there will be a place of final judgment. But I can't say decisively what I think's happening right now. It's possible that the 30 minutes and Bob, what was it, Weiss? What was that guy's name? He had that.
I'll be honest, I didn't read it because again, I'm kind of with Justin here on this one. I'm not saying I'm with him on this one, but anytime someone talks about going to heaven or going to hell and speaking to dead people, I instantly go,
when I was like 10 years ago, I listened to this guy had a vision of going into hell and a pretty strong experience. I was super compelled by it. It moved me. Let me be clear. Like I grew up, in youth camp weeping over people going to burn in hell. Like I have a fear of God, and I recognize that He is going to judge people for what they've done. And so I don't know. That's the answer. But I don't think that people. I think that people will be raised up and will be judged by God at some point that's in the future.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. So, your last point before we got cut off, just remind us what that was.
Yeah. Before we got cut off, I didn't want to dodge your question. And I wanted to say that it's possible with Matthew 25, the other, or like eternal flame, or, it's possible that this eternal flame, that this lake of fire could go on forever and ever. Like that this place that God created may exist. Like I'm not saying that that's the case, but like that's feasible to me. That this place that God created to demonstrate His judgment, and you have the three figures in Revelation 20 or 21 that it's the one time where it does say that they'll be tormented forever and ever. I don't understand that whole text because that's the whole millennial reign text, and I don't like. But I'm saying that it is possible that goes on forever and ever. So I'm not saying it does, but it's possible.
Yeah. So in your explanation of that, would you just kind of leave that up to a mystery and say that I have 100 verses that say that we as humans cease to be? 100 is an over-exaggeration, I'm sure, but we've got a plethora of scriptures, to quote the Three Amigos, a plethora of scriptures that would suggest that we cease to be, and I don't need the one verse about Satan and his angels being
it's not
tormented
Satan
forever.
And his angels. It's Satan, death, and Hades. And the false Satan, death, and the false prophet. Like in Revelation 20, it talks about them being tormented forever. That is a whole text is confusing to me, and so there's that one, but
Yeah.
what's not talking about you and me.
And again, it's an interesting. I certainly hope it's not talking about you or me. The idea that you had stated at the first program in part 1 or part A, where we had said that the few texts don't get to interpret the many texts, but the many in text. And I use that similar illustration to say that what is so clear in the light, don't question in the shadows or in the darkness. So there's that text. I think it's in it's Hebrews. There's one in chapter 6 and there's one in chapter 12, which is I think the chapter 6 one is he's tasted the heavenly of gift and it have turned away, that there's no more room for repentance. And it's like, what does that mean? It's scary. It's like, well, what I do know is 1 John is very clear that if we sin, that we can go to our Father and He'll forgive us. Right? That's so plain. What is the heavenly gift of Hebrews 6? Chill out. Like you can look at that verse and say I'm not quite sure what that means, but it sounds scary. Well, what we do know for sure 1 John means is that there's forgiveness present for the Christian. So you're approaching in that same hermeneutic, but in the subject of hell. You're saying that there is one verse over here that looks really scary, and I'm not positive what that means, but I do know what all of these verses mean that are very clear. And
it's scary for these three beings, in Revelation 20, not even people.
Yeah.
But I'll just stress this. This is one thing. Somebody was talking about deconstruction, and I've been to a really, really long journey of wrestling personally, even while pastoring publicly, wrestling privately. And what I would just encourage you, if you're in a journey, is to really fight against confirmation bias, and that means like you're looking for the arguments that confirm your bias, and sometimes your bias is not what you grew up with. Sometimes your bias is that you want what you grew up with to be wrong, and so you're just going to do anything you can to prove it wrong. And a lot of times there's a nuance or middle way in the process of wrestling that not always, that ends up being the maybe truest way, and that's maybe
it's ideological inconsistency.
It's nuance, and it puts you in a camp where, like in this camp, I have friends that are really progressive. I have friends that are really, they would call themselves progressive Christians, and they are universalists, and then I have friends that are very conservative. And both of these people, in many cases, both of these groups hate my view, And so, like, sometimes wrestling through things means that you find a third way, or you find a nuance, and you have to be willing to believe inconvenient truths. And I think that's something that we have a hard time. People who say, well, eternal conscious torment is my inconvenient truth. But what I can tell you is, being a pastor in the South, in the Bible Belt, is having anything other than the traditional view is not convenient. It does not get people to your church. I'm not winning the masses to my church because I have changed my view on hell. It has cost me more in terms of relationship than like any sort of platform that it's given me. And I think that it's important that in our journey of deconstruction or wrestling, whatever you want to call it, that we're willing to arrive at inconvenient truths. And that means it's inconvenient for our own biases, or it's inconvenient in our cultural setting or our church setting. Like, be willing to be inconvenient in your truth discovery.
And that's good. And I think that within that, be willing, be eager to search out the historical tradition of the church, because I think that what you're saying could be mistaken to say, try to find a new answer. When you say finding a third way, and I don't think that you are. But one of my passions has been to call the church back to history. If we can see what the first 300 to 500 years of the early church believed about this given subject, we would do ourselves a great service that would be extremely beneficial. I think that most of the practices that are hurting the body of Christ at large are practices that are new inventions untethered from history, from doctrinal truths.
Yeah, so that's another healthy thing. It's like one of the things people say is, well, I'm just going to believe the Bible. Well, yes, but here's the deal. Like, people have been interacting with this text for 2,000 years. And so one of the gifts that God has given us is not, we'd flesh things out in community, like Josh and I are fleshing things out.
That's right.
But we also flesh things out with the historical community of the faith. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice. And this is not to say that everybody's called to this, but if you're in the realm of like fleshing through doctrine, fleshing through teaching, don't just be picking up authors that are modern, like read through stuff that's throughout history. In fact, like dogma around eternal conscious torment is really more over the last 1,000 years, 1,200 years. It's not, there's not, I would argue that all of the early church fathers, none of them give an idea of eternal conscious torment. If you read them, but there's no dogma even developed around what hell is exactly, in the first few centuries of the church. So
so that's as far as the conversation goes about the hermeneutic. You had made the statement there are people who say, I'm just gonna believe the Bible. If we were to peel back what that really means, it is an excessively arrogant thing to say.
Yeah.
You are saying, I am going to believe what my finite mind and only my finite mind can comprehend by reading this English text that is a translation of a Greek and Hebrew text that is 4,000 to 6,000 years old. You're not taking time, you're not taking account, you're not taking language, you're not taking history, you're not taking the church's global interpretation of that for the past 6,000 years. That's ridiculous to come to a text and say, I have the authority of this subject, not to submit it to your local church, the broader evangelical community, and the global historical church at large. And I would really encourage people that have a problem with that to check the arrogance at the door, because we are honestly on this program, and I hope in your church community, we are people of truth. We are not people who are going to believe this thing because our mommy and daddy and great-grandpappy believed it, and we're going to protect ourselves in this little thought bubble, because that's not faith. That is a cult. We are a people of truth. Christ has come to reveal truth, that in him is life and all of its fullness, that he'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. Christ has come to proclaim that gospel, that good news. And as a people of God, it is our goal to figure out what is truth, what does Christ said, what does his word say, not to hide ourselves from difficulty or to hide, like that is a weak Christian. It's a weak person to live in a place of I want to say fundamentalism, but I know that word can be taken in a plurality of ways. My fundamentalist Baptist, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about fundamentalism, not fundamentalist.
Yeah. So I think I echo that sentiment. I have so many friends wrestling through their faith, and like they act like that they've done this deep dive of and the reality is that like their deep dive is paper thin.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us. I listened to this secular psychologist a couple years ago, talk about what is the posture that allows you to escape confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is it might be the most destructive cognitive thing as far as coming to good conclusion. It's just you're always looking for arguments that support your bias. And she talked about how like intelligence actually can make it hard to escape it because you can build really good arguments for your bias. Mm-hmm. And so she said, it was so interesting, this is so Jesus, she said the most important thing to escape confirmation bias in our process of life of thinking through what we believe or think is humility. Number one thing. Mm-hmm. She said the second most important thing is curiosity, but the most important thing is humility. If we have humility in our thinking, that means that we're willing to listen, we're willing to be open, then that is the kind of a posture of a heart that will allow us to encounter truth in the most pure way.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think we've already gone over time, but we're cheating because our live stream was cut short because the devil only wants to cut our conversations short when it's you and I talking about that.
What the heck?
It really doesn't happen. Like people who've been watching the show, it doesn't happen. But every time we talk about hell, bro, I'm telling. No, it's not. You've been on the show.
We came on. It happened when we did
Calvinism.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I'm going to piece this together. Like I don't know if I'm going to pull the live video down and pull this video down and tape them back together and put them back up. But like live videos always go over better. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. That's it. You got any closing thoughts?
No, just
okay.
yeah.
There's resources in the video description. Go under this video, right beneath it. It'll kind of give you a description of what the show was. There's a support link. If you are familiar with the show, if this episode has blessed you or any of our other content has blessed you, go ahead and you can give there at that link. A one-time donation or even a reoccurring gift, a monthly gift of $5 would be awesome to help keep the show on air, because we do this out of the generosity of our own heart, because we're not making a dime from this.
Let me say one thing. I would just strongly encourage you to consider helping and supporting these guys. As somebody who's pastoring people through hard questions, a lot of the content producers out there aren't really willing to wrestle with things within the perspective of orthodox. And then there's another set of content that, that are just so over here on the fundamentalist side that they won't really ask any questions. And there's this beautiful thing happening on Remnant Radio where really tough questions are asked. But the goal is always to ground people back into Jesus, back into Scripture, back into a healthy life, community with God. And you're giving to something that might be the saving grace for somebody's life who is truly wrestling and thinking through these things. And so I would just strongly encourage you to consider giving in some way if this has been meaningful to you, or if you know people like that, and point them to it.
I'm going to record that section of you saying that, and I'm going to play it on every single video we do, because that was quite compelling. I appreciate that. Thank you. It means a lot. And then later, after the support link, there are a ton of resources. We have academic resources. We have for conditionalism, academic resources for traditionalism. We have resources for the average person to read. We've got counterpoint books, which subscribe to multiple authors who have given all of their perspectives, and they kind of debate within the book, which is super helpful for many of you out there. So a lot of different resources for you to go on and check that stuff out, because we not only want to have the conversation, we actually want to resource you and how to continue this education piece for yourself. So guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Remnant Radio. I'm Josh Lewis. This is Jordan Sutton. We've got really enjoyed this program on hell, and we're going to have another one in the near future. You want to?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to have one? How do people hook up with you on the website?
ClearPathDallas.com.
ClearPathDallas.com. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I believe we have Daryl Bach coming on, and he's going to help us understand the difference between reading history into the text and changing what the text actually says, or allowing history to support the text. I keep doing this thing where I hiccup. It's going to be really good. You guys stay tuned.